This review is a milestone for my channel, as this is the first positive review I will ever be giving to the Oxford A Very Short Introduction series. Thus far, I've read Oxford's A Very Short Introduction to Religion, Judaism, Christianity, Protestantism, the Reformation, the Bible, Pentecostalism, and Catholicism, with that last one getting a planned review for later in the future. Today we are reviewing A. Edward Shininski's Orthodox Christianity, A Very Short Introduction, published by Oxford University Press 2019 in Great Britain. This particular entry stands out as the first that I have read to truly introduce its titular topic. That alone is noteworthy, but there's more to appreciate. Unlike some, this installment isn't as dry as a desert during a drought. It's both well-written and well-structured. The book is comprised of 11 chapters, along with an introduction to the introduction, a glossary of terms, and an extensive list of recommended further reading. Shininski's work could be seen as the introductory text on Christianity that Woodhead's failed to be in this same series. Covering Christian rituals, beliefs, creeds, councils, and the relationships among major sees, churches, and denominations. It extends its scope up to the events of 2018 as they pertain to the Christian world. The introduction does an excellent job of framing what the book will entail. It explains the seeming foreignness of orthodoxy to the West and clarifies that orthodoxy is the world's second largest Christian denomination, second only to Catholicism. Its first chapter, In the Beginning, takes us from Pentecost to the 8th century, offering a brief summary of the early history of the church, beginning with references directly from the Bible, especially Acts. It progresses to the development of the councils and the patriarchate. The chapter elucidates the church's relationship with the individual gospels and with the Bible as a whole. It introduces the early church fathers, their successors, the desert fathers, and the later doctors of the faith. It dives deep into the power dynamics among the patriarchs, the power struggle between Constantinople and Rome. Additionally, it discusses the significance of political figures such as Constantine and Charlemagne to Christianity. In its next chapter, Byzantines and Franks, it covers the differences, scandals, disagreements, and resulting schisms from the aforementioned power struggle. In this chapter, the book covers Islam's and the Crusades' impact on Christianity through territorial warfare between the two religions, that of Christianity and Islam. It briefly addresses the sins of the Latin Church, including the sacking of significant Christian and historical World Heritage sites. Importantly, the book avoids assigning blame solely to one side, instead highlighting tensions and mistakes and missteps from all sides that were made along the way. It explains where the final divisions occurred, notably through the actions of the Frankish mercenaries, while also acknowledging that subsequent popes condemned these acts. In Constantinople and Moscow, the book jumps ahead to 1261 and concludes the chapter in 1672, addressing Moscow's rise as a new member of the Patriarchate in the aftermath of the Great Schism between the East and the West, i.e. between Catholic Rome and Eastern Orthodoxy. A major focus in this chapter is on the Filioque controversy and the roles that Gregory Palamas, Thomas Aquinas, and Augustine played in dividing, separating out, and distinguishing Eastern from Western thought. This chapter clarifies the differences between Western divine simplicity and the Eastern concepts of energies, essences, spiration, and generation. It also underscores that while Orthodoxy and Rome have a schism, Orthodoxy has never embraced Protestantism, which it views as heresy. Mentioning Martin Luther only briefly, it swiftly moves on to discuss the Turks and spends considerable time describing the events around Russia's growth as a major Orthodox power and the historical divisions between Russia and Ukraine. Persecution and resurrection. This chapter covers a shift in the narrative of Christian history that can only be described as the decline of worldwide orthodoxy in the face of modern evils such as Nazism, fascism, socialism, and communism. Despite these adversities, attempting to choke out and destroy orthodoxy in all of its forms, this chapter illustrates how repression and suppression ultimately failed. It mentions notable saints within the Orthodox world who stood up for the faith and were martyred during these troubled times, and explores the minor and major schisms that occurred throughout this period, demonstrating that while under real persecution, Orthodoxy also faced similar challenges to those experienced in Western Latin Catholicism, which was thriving as Orthodoxy was being pruned. Surprisingly, despite covering such horrors, the chapter ends on a positive note, highlighting the significant events surrounding the 2016 attempt of the new Orthodoxy to unite in the Great and Holy Council of the Orthodox Church, which was held in Crete as a way to celebrate this rebirth. Unfortunately, this unity was not fully achieved, as not all churches labeled under global orthodoxy agreed to attend. The reason for this hesitancy was the fear of capitulation or acknowledgement of the dominance of Western Christianity, as many of these churches were hesitant to reconcile with the Western Church, which they feared this council would do or try to promote, viewing Western Christianity as corrupted by modernity. The liberation of Greece and Constantinople from Islamic rule, as well as the fall of the Soviet Union, marked a rebirth and growth of orthodoxy in the old world. But it also meant that orthodoxy was now confronting the challenges of the modern world it had entered into. Challenges of the modern world faced by the rest of Christianity today. Sources of Orthodox thought. This chapter explains the roles of Holy Tradition and liturgy in the Orthodox Church. It also explains Orthodox views of the Virgin Mary as the Holy Theotokos, and asserts their belief in Mary's sinlessness and the veneration of icons. I believe this chapter begins by elucidating the role of the creeds in Orthodoxy and defining the Trinity in relation to Christianity, Catholicism, and Eastern Orthodoxy. It also discusses monotheism within Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and highlights the significance of figures such as John Damascus and John Chrysostom in these discussions. The chapter addresses and refutes major heresies opposing Orthodox doctrine. This chapter does a good job of affirming the Holy Trinity and explaining the Orthodox view of the Old Testament in relation to the New Testament. It dedicates a section which it highlights with a blue background, which to the atonement or satisfaction. And in the blue section, the book explores the question of why God became man. While this section stands out from the rest of the book, its inclusion enriches the text, and I am glad it was included. There are also other blue highlighted sections throughout the book. The rest of this chapter explains the liturgy and the order of the Mass, or divine worship, emphasizing the belief in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Next comes the chapter titled Praying Unceasingly. This chapter covers various topics, starting with Maximus the Confessor. It clarifies the Orthodox view of the fall, distinguishing it from the concept of original sin in the Western Church. For Orthodoxy, there is no inherited original sin, but rather every man and woman has an internal conflict between man's fallen nature and his divine nature, which can only be resolved through communion with God. This chapter explores Christian virtue, self-mastery, asceticism, and the practice of prayer in both public and private life. It promotes the use of prayer ropes for continuous prayer throughout the day and emphasizes the significance of the Jesus prayer in Orthodoxy, much like the Our Father in Catholicism. The chapter discusses the process of theosis, referencing the ladder of divine ascent explained by John Climacus. And this chapter highlights the importance of Mount Athos, also called the Holy Mountain, in Orthodox monasticism. Additionally, it acknowledges the role of Eastern monasticism and its luminaries, such as Anthony the Great and Mary of Egypt in Orthodoxy, while addressing the differences in Orthodoxy of the treatment of men and women compared to their treatment in Western Christianity, such as no female, human or animal, is allowed on the holy mountain, and how in some Eastern churches men and women have separate worship areas. The chapter also discusses Orthodox perspectives on saints, Mariology, icons, angels, and again emphasizes the importance of martyrs in Orthodox communities. One Holy and Apostolic Church. This chapter dedicates time to explaining parish life and the interaction between lay ministers, the church hierarchy, that is bishop, priest, and deacon, and the church. It emphasizes that all Christians are part of the royal priesthood and affirms the hierarchical structure of bishop, priest, and deacon. Controversies such as deaconesses and lay ministers are addressed, along with describing how confession works in the Orthodox Church. The chapter explains the role of the Holy Spirit, or Paraclete, as the advocate and guide, and also discusses topics such as synodality, ecumenicalism, and the proper role of the bishop in a Orthodox community. It explains the relationship between Rome and Constantinople, as well as the other patriarchates, emphasizing the Orthodox view of the Pope as the first among equals, and the distinction between Catholics' view of an archbishop and Orthodoxy's view of a metropolitan. It explores the patriarchates and the roles of Peter and Paul in relation to the other apostles, explaining the establishment of different sees or patriarchates. Major patriarchs are listed, including the newer upstarts. The chapter revisits differences between Russia and Ukraine and Rome and Constantinople, outlining areas of historical resentment and future hopes for reconciliation. It concludes optimistically on the slow process of healing between Orthodox and Catholic leadership, particularly in issues like environmental stewardship, while acknowledging the remaining differences, such as the practice of married priests, the requirement of beards among Orthodox clergy compared to Catholic disciplines, as well as the differences between the lay people, between the lay communities. In We No Longer Knew Whether We Were in Heaven or on Earth, this chapter radiates a sense of glory, victory, and triumphalism, unlike the other chapters. It explains the Orthodox calendar, highlighting high holy days, important feast days, and fast days. It discusses the growth of Orthodoxy and its commitment to ecumenical ideals. In The Mysteries, the book offers a brief overview of everyday activities in Orthodox life, focusing in this chapter on sacraments and blessings. While it briefly touches on various rites, it emphasizes that rites and blessings guide believers to the sacraments, where Christ is present. Despite stressing differences with Catholicism, this chapter is conciliatory toward major Catholic developments against Protestantism, including the Council of Trent. It underscores the importance of a bishop in shepherding the faithful and asserts that blessings and objects, such as relics and icons in Orthodoxy, are more than mere ceremonies, ceremonials, or symbols, but manifestations of Christ's ongoing presence in the world. Orthodoxy in the Modern World, the final chapter of this book, brings us to the 20th and 21st centuries, highlighting the relevance of Orthodoxy in places like Syria, Egypt, Palestine, Russia, Ukraine, Ethiopia, and the United States. It conveys the sentiment that Orthodoxy is not merely a relic of the past or a museum piece, but a living, dynamic faith. The chapter emphasizes that the Orthodox Church has engaged with major contemporary issues, including abortion, equality, and same-sex marriage, with Orthodox theology, priests, and bishops actively contributing to these discussions. Despite not being as visible or popular as Catholicism or Protestantism, Orthodoxy remains the second largest world religion after Catholicism, with Islam closely following. While the lack of a centralized, overarching hierarchy in Orthodoxy may make its presence less obvious, its relevance to contemporary issues concerning clergy and orientation is evident. This chapter also highlights organizations, particularly in America, which promote Orthodoxy's continued significance and voice in global developments. This chapter and book concludes with a plea not to dismiss Orthodoxy as a relic of the past, noting its significant presence in conflicts and struggles worldwide, from Jerusalem to Ukraine, where Orthodox Christians are actively involved. In conclusion, my journey through this text highlighted for me the enduring relevance and vibrancy of Orthodoxy in both world history and in the modern world. From its historical roots to its present day, Orthodoxy engages with the contemporary issues of the day, or so this book claims, thus emerging as a living faith, not one confined to its past. This book highlights Orthodoxy's presence and significance in the history of the world and exclaims its presence from the Middle East to America, illustrating its global reach and impact. Despite challenges from without and within, and its differences from other Christian communities, Orthodoxy stands as the second largest world religion. For the Orthodox, the absence of a centralized hierarchy does not diminish its relevance. Rather, as it understands it, it underscores its adaptability and resilience in the face of persecution and an ever-changing world. The book ends with a plea to urge its readers not to overlook Orthodoxy's contributions or dismiss it as outdated, emphasizing its presence worldwide, claiming that thus Orthodoxy emerges from history not as a relic of the past, but as a dynamic force shaping the future course of history in the present age. I give this book a 4 out of 5, a high recommendation from me to you. Right here. Go get this book. It's good. Peace.